A struggling waitress was fired for bringing her sick daughter to work. She didn't know her new boss walked in and changed everything. You left the floor for 30 minutes. 30 minutes. The manager's voice cut through the low hum of the morning rush like a blade. To go play with your kid in the storage room? What the hell do you think this is? Pamela? A daycare? Pamela froze near the kitchen door. Her apron slightly stained. Her notepad clutched tight in one hand. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a bun. But wisps had fallen around her flushed cheeks. She looked up slowly. Her eyes wide with panic. No. She said softly. I am sorry. She has a fever. I didn't know what else to do. The customers near the front paused. Forks halfway to their mouths. Some pretended not to hear. Their gazes fixed on their plates. A few glanced curiously. Then quickly looked away. Not wanting to be involved. The manager. A wiry man named Carl with a short fuse and a long list of grudges. Leaned in closer. His voice rising even more. You brought a sick toddler into a food service environment. Are you out of your mind? Pamela's voice cracked. If I took her to the hospital, they'd admit her for days. And if I miss even 2 shifts, I won't make rent next month. I just needed to make it through today. She's in the back. Quiet. Sleeping. I checked on her during a break. Break? Carl barked with a cruel laugh. You're a server. You take breaks when I say you take breaks. You left 3 tables waiting for coffee. I'm sorry. She whispered. Her eyes welling with tears she refused to let fall. Please. I'll make it up. I'll stay late. I'll cover extra shifts. Carl just pointed a rigid finger toward the door. No. We're done. This is not the first time you've let your personal drama bleed into your work. Pack your things. You're fired. Pamela's mouth opened. But no sound came out. A cold dread washed over her. She looked over her shoulder toward the back room where her daughter, Maria, lay bundled in a blanket atop 2 flattened cardboard boxes and her own thin jacket. Her heart pounded in her chest. A frantic drum against her ribs. I'll get her. She whispered. Carl shook his head and walked off. Muttering. Unbelievable. She walked stiffly past the fry station. Past the curious eyes and silent stares of her coworkers. And into the dimly lit storage room. Her little girl was sleeping. Her cheeks flushed from the fever. Her dark curls damp with sweat. Pamela crouched down. Gently touching her forehead. Then carefully wrapped the child in the blanket. Maria stirred and blinked slowly. Mommy? She murmured. It's okay. Baby. I've got you. Pamela whispered. Swallowing the lump in her throat. She lifted her daughter into her arms. The small body burning with heat against her chest. As she stepped out the back door of the restaurant. The cold drizzle of the morning rain turned heavier. Within seconds. Her thin uniform was soaked. She clutched Maria tighter. Shielding the child with her own body as best she could. Her eyes stung from the relentless rain and the burning shame. She didn't look back. Not at the kitchen. Not at Carl. And not at the people who didn't speak up. She just walked forward. Out into the gray street. A 3-year-old in her arms and nowhere to go. The rain fell harder now. But she kept walking. One foot in front of the other. Driven only by instinct and desperation. What Pamela didn't see, what she couldn't have known, was the man sitting alone in the far corner booth by the window. He had been there the entire time. He had seen everything. He watched as the front door swung closed behind her. Watched the child's tiny face pressed against her mother's shoulder. And the way Pamela's hand never once loosened its protective grip. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But something in his expression shifted just slightly. As if a memory had stirred from long ago. He reached for his coffee. But did not drink it. Instead, he sat very still. His eyes fixed on the rain-drenched sidewalk where a young mother and her sick child disappeared into the morning. The diner was quieter now. The breakfast rush had passed. Leaving behind empty plates and half-drunk coffee cups. But at the corner booth near the window, one man had barely touched his meal. Gerald Whitmore sat with perfect posture. His eyes on the rain-smeared glass. Though his thoughts were miles from the storm outside. Dressed in a plain dark coat and a crisp gray button-down shirt. He looked no different from any other businessman grabbing breakfast on his way to somewhere important. Which was exactly what he wanted. What no one knew, not the servers. Not the cook. Not the red-faced manager in the back room, was that Gerald was not just another customer. He was the new owner. The ink on the deal had dried only 3 weeks ago. His company, Whitmore Hospitality Group, had acquired the struggling diner chain in a quiet buyout. Now, he was spending a month visiting locations anonymously. Observing their culture. Their management. Their values or lack thereof. Today, this small suburban location had given him more than enough to think about. He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip. The image of the young woman holding her feverish daughter refusing to leave his mind. Her eyes had said everything: shame, fear, and exhaustion. But also something else. Something that hit Gerald harder than he expected. Restraint. Dignity. She had begged with her voice low. Her posture still. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cursed. She had simply endured. He remembered that look because he had once worn it himself. He opened the leather-bound notebook he carried everywhere and flipped to a clean page. In tidy, precise handwriting, he wrote, Pamela. Waitress. Blonde. Early 20s. Fired for caring for her child. Calm under pressure. Should not be discarded. He drew a line under her name. Then turned to a different section labeled, Internal Review, Personnel. Manager, Carl. Aggressive. Lacks empathy. Endangers brand integrity. Immediate termination. Gerald closed the notebook and tapped his pen once against the edge of the table. He waved over the young server who had nervously brought him his untouched breakfast earlier. Can I get the check? He asked politely. She nodded. Fumbling with the bill folder. Yes. Sir. I hope everything was okay. I'm really sorry about the earlier situation. Gerald offered a small smile. One that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was informative. He said. He took the folder. Slipped in a crisp $100 bill. And tucked a smaller card behind it. On the back of the card, in firm black ink, he wrote a single note: management like this hurts more than your margins. I'll be back. He stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out into the drizzle without another word. As the door closed behind him, the young server opened the folder. Her eyes widened at the tip. Then at the message. She turned the card over. Her breath caught in her throat. Whitmore Hospitality Group, CEO. She looked up toward the door. But Gerald was already gone. Pamela sat in the corner of her tiny apartment, holding Maria close. The landlord's voice from that morning still echoed in her ears flat. Impatient. Final. You're a week late again. I'm sorry, Pam. But I have bills. 2. You need to be out by tomorrow. She hadn't argued. She couldn't. There was no money left to argue with. She packed what little she could into 2 duffel bags, bundled Maria in an oversized hoodie, and stepped out into the gray afternoon. By dusk, the drizzle had returned, soaking their shoes as they trudged through back streets and alleyways. Pamela's final hope was the county hospital. She sat with Maria on her lap for hours in the emergency room lobby. But when their turn finally came, the nurse glanced at her outdated insurance card and gave a tired, apologetic shake of her head. She needs rest and fluids. But we can't admit her without active coverage. The nurse said gently. Do you have a place to stay? Pamela just stared at the floor. The shame too heavy for words. Outside, the rain came down harder. They wandered aimlessly until she found a narrow alley behind a laundromat, hidden from view but with a crooked awning offering minimal shelter. She laid down the thin blanket she'd carried, sat with her back to the cold brick wall, and pulled Maria into her lap. Her daughter whimpered in her sleep. Pamela's hands trembled as she wrapped the blanket around them both. Rain pounded the pavement just inches away. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. And she could no longer hold it in. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. I've done everything I could. I really tried. Baby. Maria stirred, opened her eyes slowly, and in a soft, sleepy voice said, It's okay, Mommy. I don't need anything. Just you. Pamela's heart shattered. She buried her face in her daughter's damp hair, crying silently, her shoulders shaking with the weight of every failure. Then came the headlights. A sleek black car pulled to the curb just outside the alley. Pamela flinched, clutching Maria protectively. The driver's side window rolled down. And there he was, the man from the diner. Gerald. He looked directly at her. Not with pity, but with quiet recognition. You need a place to get warm, he said, his voice calm and even. Please. Get in. Her instincts screamed caution. But her arms were going numb and Maria's fever was rising again. She looked at Gerald one more time. There was something steady in his eyes. No agenda. No judgment. She nodded. Inside the car, warmth enveloped them. Pamela sank into the plush leather seat, still holding Maria tightly. Gerald turned the heat on high and handed her a clean towel from the back seat. Thank you, she murmured. They drove in silence for several minutes. Finally, Gerald said, I remember you from the diner. Pamela stiffened. I'm sorry you had to see that. He shook his head. I'm not. She looked at him, surprised. He continued. I saw a woman doing everything she could to protect her child. That's not something to be ashamed of. Pamela exhaled slowly, the knot in her chest loosening just a little. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I used to be in school college. Actually. Business major. I had plans. Internships. Even a scholarship. But then. I met someone. Thought he cared. Got pregnant. He left. My parents cut me off. Said I ruined everything. She stared out the window at the blurred city lights. I chose my daughter. And after that, nothing was the same. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice low. I was raised in state facilities. Bounced from one group home to another. No one wanted a boy who kept to himself and didn't know how to smile. I learned early how easy it is to be forgotten. Pamela turned to look at him. Really look at him. He met her gaze and said quietly. I know what it feels like to be invisible. He pulled the car into a covered parking garage and turned off the engine. The rain tapped gently on the roof. I've built everything I have by watching people like you. He said. People who refuse to give up. Who endure quietly. He looked down at Maria. Now asleep in her mother's arms. Then back to Pamela. I see myself in you. He said. His voice softer now. But you're stronger. You've cared for someone else when no one was there to care for you. Pamela blinked. Her eyes full. I don't know what to say. Gerald offered the faintest of smiles. You don't have to say anything. Just let me help. The next morning, Pamela sat in a quiet, modern lounge on the top floor of an office building she never imagined stepping foot inside. Her clothes had been exchanged for a simple, clean outfit someone from the staff had quietly brought her. Maria, finally resting comfortably, was in a nearby room, wrapped in a soft blanket and watching cartoons on a tablet. Across from her sat Gerald. He placed a folder on the table between them. I want to offer you a position, he said. His voice even and direct. Pamela blinked. I'm sorry. What? At our flagship restaurant. It's opening in 3 weeks downtown. Gerald explained. It's a position for assistant floor manager. She stared at him. Bewildered. I don't understand. I don't have the experience. Gerald pushed the folder slightly closer. You've been on your feet since you were 19. You've led without being given a title. Solved problems without training. And handled pressure no job description could prepare you for. That's more experience than half the candidates I've interviewed. But I didn't finish college. Pamela said, shaking her head. And yesterday, I was fired in front of a room full of strangers. He nodded. I saw what happened. And what I saw wasn't someone who deserved to be fired. I saw someone who held it all together. Who stayed composed even when humiliated. You chose to protect your daughter. That's leadership. She looked down at her tea. Emotions rising again. I've made a lot of mistakes, she said quietly. So have I, Gerald replied. But mistakes aren't the measure of a person's worth. What they do next is. He opened the folder for her. Inside was a formal job offer, salary, schedule, benefits, full training provided. You'd start as a manager in training. He continued. We'll mentor you. Get you certified. This position isn't a test. It's trust. Pamela's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. I don't think anyone's ever believed in me like this before, she said, her voice breaking. Gerald's tone softened. Well, now someone does. She pressed the pen to the paper, her name forming in slow, careful strokes. When she looked up at Gerald, she saw not a CEO, not a savior, but someone who understood what it meant to have everything and still feel alone. In the years that followed, Pamela didn't just meet expectations. She redefined them. She rose from assistant manager to director of people and development, a role Gerald created specifically for her. She implemented mentorship programs, flexible scheduling for single parents, and a human-centered onboarding process that became the gold standard for the company. The brand flourished, not just because of its food, but because of its culture Pamela built. One crisp autumn afternoon, Gerald invited Pamela and Maria on a site visit to a quiet coastal town called Seabrook. After a day of looking at potential properties, they walked along the beach as the sun began to set. Maria, now a bright and happy 7-year-old, ran ahead. Her laughter carried on the breeze. I used to come here, Gerald said quietly, as he and Pamela sat on a dune overlooking the ocean. The group home brought us for one weekend every summer. I used to collect seashells and pretend they were jewels for sale, hoping some nice couple would see me and decide they wanted a kid like me. Pamela didn't speak. She simply reached down, picked up a smooth, pearlescent shell, and placed it gently in his hand. He looked at the shell, then at her. And for the first time, she saw the lonely boy he used to be. Later that night, as Gerald tucked a sleeping Maria into bed at their hotel, she stirred. Mr. Gerald? She mumbled. I'm here, he said softly. Mommy says you're our family now, she whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. Like a real one. A feeling he couldn't name warm and vast settled in Gerald's chest. He looked over at Pamela, who stood in the doorway, her eyes shining with tears. In that silent, shared moment, everything clicked into place. The next year, at the grand opening of the new Seabrook restaurant, Gerald didn't make a speech. Instead, he simply invited Pamela to the stage. She walked up, holding the microphone. A picture of quiet confidence. A few years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. I was a single mother with no job, no home, and very little hope. I thought my story was over. But someone gave me more than a job. He gave me a chance to write a new ending. She looked toward Gerald, who was standing in the front row, holding Maria's hand. He taught me that your past doesn't define you, and that the strongest leaders are the ones who lead with empathy. She paused, smiling. Tonight, we opened this beautiful restaurant. But for me, it's more than that. It's a testament to second chances. It's proof that a little kindness can change everything. She looked directly at Gerald. And it's the beginning of our family's next chapter. As the audience erupted in applause, Gerald squeezed Maria's hand. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a partner. He was a father. He was home. The little boy who once sold imaginary jewels on a lonely beach finally had a family to call his own. Built not on business, but on love, resilience, and the quiet understanding that the best things in life are the ones you never expected. If this story moved you, if you felt even a flicker of hope, strength, or warmth, please subscribe to our channel. Here, we honor the resilience of the human heart and celebrate the ordinary moments that lead to extraordinary love. Until next time, take care, and never stop believing in second chances.